primarily on what the narrator says. The actors may ad-lib as they try to make their characters' personalities come to life. Let me introduce our cast. The narrator, a person who speaks well but can't act, would be good for this role. Oh, I don't think I was supposed to read that part. Let me introduce our narrator. Our hero, Dudley Do-Right, is good looking and strong as the smell of Luna Fist sitting in the sun on a hot summer day. Our heroine, sweet Polly Pureheart, is a lovely gal who is sweet on Dudley and loves how he looks in his new jeans. The villain, Dastardly Dan, is heartless, faithless, and mean as a junkyard dog. He and his wife Ruth were married for years, but she left him. So not only is he heartless and faithless, he's ruthless too. Grandmother to sweet Polly sings in the church choir and has also been known to shake her tuchus at the more upbeat hymns. The preacher. The congregation says his sermons are good, surpassed only by his silent prayers. The dense forest. Side by side, these trees give us the illusion of a dense forest. Branches up, trees, get those branches up. The pew. Anyone can be dense. I mean, a dense forest. But it takes a fine actor to be a pew. The offering plate is well-rounded but flat. The baptismal font, probably the most important fixture in any church. It holds life-giving water. Last but not least, we have Shep, the dog. Shep is a mangy mutt, but is loved dearly by grandma.
Howdy, folks. I'm here to share with you a tale as tall as tumbleweed. So sit back and relax a bit as our group of fine actors bring our story to life. The scene takes place back in the wild, wild west, in a little town known as Dry Gulch. In Dry Gulch, everything was dry. The rivers and streams were dry, the wells were dry, even the humor was dry. But the people of a local church weren't dry. They were wet. They were wet in the Word, drenched in baptismal water, soaked in God's grace, saturated in sanctification. As our story opens, we find ourselves in the sanctuary of Dry Gulch Lutheran Church. All is quiet when suddenly Dastardly Dan appears, tiptoeing into the church with an angry, snarly look on his face, carrying in his right hand an empty cup.
Right hand.
He sneaks in like a snake in the grass and goes over to the baptismal font. He dips his cup into the water, and with his shifty eyes, takes a drink. Oddly, the snarly look on his face softens just a bit. I said just a bit. The sound of footsteps is drawing closer. It's the preacher coming. Dastardly Dan drops the cup into the baptismal font and crouches down, hiding behind the pew. The preacher enters to practice his Sunday morning sermon. He begins reciting his sermon when he notices the cup and removes it from the font. The preacher leaves to return the cup to the church kitchen. Dastardly Dan slips out from behind the pew and goes out to hide in the dense forest. Now we hear sweet Polly Pierheart enter while whistling a merry tune. She skips along joyfully, without a care in the world, headed for the forest, picking flowers for the altar guild. Unbeknownst to her, the village villain, Dastardly Dan, is creeping up behind her. He grabs her flowers. She screams. Throws the flowers onto the ground and stomps on them. He laughs an evil laugh. Interestingly, he can't get the thought of that glorious water out of his head, so he slinks back to the church. As the villain slinks back to the church, Polly's grandmother is also making her way to the church, followed closely by her faithful dog. Granny's old dog Shep, who often accompanies her to church, goes and curls up under the pew for a nap. Straightening up the hymnals in the pews while singing When the Roll is Called Up Yonder.
When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder.
She sings quietly to herself. Just then, Shep wakes up and begs Granny for a treat. Granny says, "No, you old varmint, you don't need a treat."
No, you old varmint, you don't need a treat.
Shep whines and begs until Granny reaches into her pocket and takes out a treat.
You can beg better.
Granny says, "Speak."
Oh, speak.
Granny rewards the dog with the treat, and the dog climbs up onto the pew. "Down," says Granny.
Down.
Then Shep goes and lies in the corner. Just then, the villain enters the church with Sweet Polly in his clutches. Granny screams. The villain says, "I'm taking your water and your little dog too."
I'm taking your water and the little dog too.
The dog rushes over and growls at the villain. Polly faints and falls onto the pew. The dog then goes over to Polly to revive her, and just as the dog is about to lick her on the face, our hero, Dudley Do-Right, enters, shouting something heroic.
My name is Dudley Do-Right.
And getting balance is my game.
Dudley was investigating a robbery and had tracked down his prime suspect, Dastardly Dan. With a keen eye, Dudley glances down at Dastardly Dan's boot, and says, "I believe there is evil afoot." Dudley takes the And what, pray tell, is on the bottom of Dastardly Dan's boot but the gold coins that had been stolen in a bank robbery last week? Dudley exclaims, "Aha! What have we here?"
Aha! What have we here?
Dastardly Dan shouts, "That's the soul of money."
That's the soul of man.
All the shouting and the dog growling rouses Polly. She stands up and screams, "Oh, my darling Dudley!"
My darling Dudley.
Dudley and Polly gaze into each other's eyes and high five. While Granny is shushing Shep, and Dudley and Polly continue to high five, the villain goes over to the font and begins to wash his face in the water. Suddenly, there seems to be yet another transformation. Dastardly Dan's snarling face softens. Just a little bit. He says, "I've washed in this water and I don't feel as mean as I oughter. I'm feeling kind of funny. So I'm going to take this soul of money and put it into the plate before it's too late."
I didn't know I was about to rhyme.
The preacher walks in as Dastardly Dan grabs the baptismal font with its water. The preacher says, "Dastardly Dan, you can have the water. It's free to all."
Dastardly Dan, you can have the water. It's free.
Dastardly Dan says, "I ain't taking no chances, preacher."
I ain't taking no chances, preacher.
And he rushes out with the bucket of water and shouts, "It's mine, all mine."
Mine, oh mine.
Dudley Do-Right points his finger in the air and shouts something very heroic.
It is time to save the day. To infinity and beyond.
Dudley chases Dan out of the church. Polly and Granny begin to cry. The preacher prays, the dog stays, and the font stands alone. Suddenly, there's loud shouting as Dudley chases Dan back into the church.
Hey, come, get in there.
Dudley says, "You're cornered, Dan. Now give me the water."
You're cornered, Dan. Now give me the water.
Dastardly Dan says, "If I can't have it, nobody can have it."
If I can't have it, nobody can have it.
Go ahead. Dastardly Dan says, "There, it's all gone."
There, it's all gone.
And the preacher says,
All right.
and the preacher says,
No, Dan, it's the water that never runs out. The forgiveness this water brings never ends. And if you are alive in your baptism and share the love of Jesus, you too can live wet.
the preacher baptizes Dan in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Today, Dastardly Dan experienced new birth through the water and the Spirit. Today, Dastardly Dan got a new name, Child of God. So, folks, here ends our tall tale of Dastardly Dan and the people of Dry Gulch. Dastardly Dan went on to reclaim his inner resources and has used his gifts to chair the Church Stewardship Committee. Thank you all kindly for listening in on our madcap adventure.
Amen.